Okay, we're going to start the question and answer with State Senator Phil Pavlov. I'll let him do his own bio. And Phil, just come on up. Tell us about yourself and have at it.
Will do. Thanks, Greg, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. How many of you were on the front lawn of the courthouse on April 15th, 2010 for the first Tea Party in Lapeer County? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, May 8, 2009. And I look at that timing and I look at where we've come in that number of 6, 7 years. And it's really been amazing. At the time that I was there alongside with you, this national movement was taking place. And it was taking place really started by one person who said we ought to have a Tea Party again. And from there, we energized people. And I will tell you that at the time I was a state representative running for Congress, or running for the state Senate, and Lapeer County was a new area for me. I had represented a small portion of St. Clair County, and when I decided to run for the state Senate, I had a lot of new people to meet in Lapeer County. And I thought about that, so I drove out in my car, and I said, I'm going to go there. I'll be on that front lawn on that very day. And I had no idea that there'd be probably 600 or 700 people that were there with the same passion and with the same love for this country, that knew that we were on a pathway that was going to be unsustainable. The Obama administration had been working through Obamacare, and gun control was at the very center of his platform. The Democrats controlled everything, and people were scared. People were terrified about what the future could hold for them. And wouldn't you know, it played out to those very same fears, and those fears became reality. And we had Obamacare, and we had an onslaught on our Second Amendment. Who would have known how many short steps it was going to be from not only those first attacks on the Second Amendment, but the first attacks on the First Amendment? And we fast forward to where we are in 2016 today, and we've now got a policy coming from this administration that's trying to regulate every single bathroom in every public school in this country. Not only are they trying to regulate those bathrooms, they're going to use our tax dollars as hostage to drive down behavioral, socioeconomic conditions within our schools. When we think about where our freedoms are and how we work so hard to get them and how far they've gone the other way, previous speaker and the scholarship winner clearly laid out the fact that you're seeing more and more of those personal liberties taken away. You've seen it in your health care. You've seen it in the loss of your choices for who your doctor is. You've seen skyrocketing personal premiums. All of this stuff is being done to you from the federal government and not for you. I fast forward to where we were. I was fortunate to win a 3- or 4-way primary to become your state senator in 2010. And I made a commitment to the people in Lapeer County at that time, and I said, I'm going to give you everything that I got. I'm going to be committed to working on the issues that matter to families as I walk through the district day after day after day. And those issues were very serious. Those were real problems that they were facing. Michigan's economy was still in a death spiral. We were just coming off of 2 state government shutdowns during that period of time. We had the worst tax policy in the country. And the only commitment that I made is I'm going to give you everything that I have to solve the problems of the day. And so the voters elected me in 2010, and in 2011 when we took office, we got right after the problems that were facing Michigan. We were fortunate to get a Republican governor. We had a Republican House and a Senate. The recipe was right for the kind of reforms that were going to have to take place in order just to save families in Michigan. If you go back to those dark days and think about how many of the kids and neighbors and friends of you were leaving the state of Michigan, they weren't leaving it for the warm weather. They were leaving it because there was no opportunity. We were coming off a period of time where we had nearly 15% unemployment in this state. Year after year after year, we were struggling and wrestling with a $2 billion deficit year after year. When I got in the Senate, I said, we're not going to do that anymore. We've got to put some leadership to these problems, and we did it. The very first thing that we tried to do is reform our tax code. Why start with tax code? Because tax and spending go together, and that was what was causing the structural deficit in our state. That's what was pulling us $2 billion short every year. And when we looked at where our tax policy was, we had the worst tax policy in the country. The only way it could have been worse if we had 51 states. We got rid of the Michigan business tax, which I promised and I would work to do that. We got rid of that in our first year in the Senate. And so once that started, it was short steps to being able to take care of the spending problems. And once we got our hands around that problem, we really had the makings of a stable economy. And while it was tough, we still had $1.5 billion to work on. We still had to do a whole bunch of other things. And those other things included looking at the very long-term liabilities that were crushing our state. It also had a lot to do with taking a look at reforming our education system, reforming our state retirement systems, our pension systems, because all of those were factors requiring to get Michigan back on a path. So after a couple of years, we started to see the traction begin to take hold in Michigan's recovery. Along that time, we wiped out 1,500 regulations that were crushing businesses, that were crushing families. And once we got onto that pathway, we could really start to see some momentum come along. And at that point, a year or two later, we jumped in to make Michigan the 23rd right-to-work state in the country. And if you'd have told me when I first got into politics that we would get Michigan to a right-to-work state, I would have hoped for that. I would have worked hard for that, but I would have never predicted we'd do that in 2012. We put all of those very difficult reforms in place for an outcome, and the outcome was a new opportunity and some prosperity for the families that we represent. We never lifted off the gas during that time. So where we are today, we've got the lowest unemployment rate that we've had in 15 years. We've created 465,000 new jobs in this state. Our graduating seniors who are walking across the aisle today in their graduation ceremonies can now walk across that aisle with an opportunity for college credits in one hand through the expansion of dual enrollment. We've worked on holding the cap down on the cost of higher education in this state, and we've created an environment for job providers to succeed. That's what government's role is, and that's what we've been able to do. When it came time to make the decision, when I heard the news like everybody else that Candace Miller was going to retire from Congress, I had to take a look at where do I want to go in my career? And does the job in Congress fit with where I am personally? Does it fit where the voters think that I would be? And I concluded very quickly that if we were to apply the very same leadership principles that we've been able to accomplish, those great results in the state of Michigan at the federal government, that's something I'm very interested in doing. That's something that I would commit 18 months of a campaign in an open congressional seat to win. But more importantly, after that campaign was done, be the commitment that I would do to go in there and take on those very same problems. If you're looking, and there's 5 Republican candidates that will be squaring off on August 2nd, I'm here asking for your support tonight. I'm here to demonstrate my record, answer questions that you would have. But when I thought about the problems facing our country, tax code. At 35%, we have the highest marginal tax code in the world. Imagine what it would look like if we took it from 35 down to 25, and we weren't sending these corporations to different countries, driving them out. See, the problem with the 35% tax code is that when they leave the burden with the people that stay. And so that number is going to continue to ratchet up. And it's killing jobs, it's crushing families, and it's putting us at a disproportionate advantage in a world economy. And our competitors know that. This isn't any secret. They know they have a competitive edge over the United States, and we don't need to give that back. That's the biggest issue facing our country today. The other thing is the spending problem. We're ticking real close to a $20 trillion deficit. And I know there's smart people in this room, but it's very difficult to imagine how big $20 trillion of debt is, but it's big. And it's about 60 grand for every man, woman, and child in this country. And as we continue to have unchecked spending, we're accumulating more and more debt on the people that can least afford it. And that, again, is squeezing out economic opportunities. That's why we have an economy that's plugging along at 1.5% growth. I mean, imagine what this country would look like if we got the right policies in place that got us to 4%, which is about the normal, which is about the average of how an economy should be performing. It will not get there under the current conditions. We've got a wet blanket on this economy, and if we can't get control of that spending, you're never going to get control of the economy. And you'll continue to see it. Just last week we had the worst jobs numbers in 7 years reported yesterday. We created 1 job in this country for every 8,000 citizens. You think about that. That's what's stifling our economy. And so if our families aren't growing and we don't have opportunity to earn, spend, and save, it doesn't matter. As I go around and talk to people every day, it's very clear that they understand that we are in a stagnant economy. Most middle-class people haven't had a raise in about 9 or 10 years. That number is passing along the side. But the interesting part in the jobs numbers from last week, these are middle-class jobs that are going away. And the reason they're going away is because we've traded in these jobs for handouts. We've included and increased the number of Social Security disability claims in this country. We've incentivized it to a point where the new norm for anybody coming out with government benefits is $15 an hour. That's where people have pegged it in their mind, that they can get government benefits at $15 an hour. So, we did a town hall meeting up in North Branch about a month ago, and I was talking to the owner of the North Branch Bakery. We're having a difficult time keeping people employed there. Why is that? Because these kids today believe that it's $15 an hour, and they're not going to work for anything less. Their economy, their businesses are struggling because of the handouts. We need to put jobs in front of handouts. The only way that we can get jobs ahead of those handouts is have an opportunity to grow an economy and to be competitive not only in our country, but competitive around the world. And so as I work through a very long campaign and I talk to people every day, the families that I talk to, there are a few outliers that aren't really affected by today's economy, but if you think about it, everybody has some kind of connection to a stagnant economy. We look at the amount of debt, and I hope that these scholarships are helping you reduce the number of debt dollars that you have. But we are putting the largest expansion of consumer debt on the backs of our kids. I'll call them kids 18 to 24 years old that can least afford to take on that debt. We're bumping up to $1.3 trillion worth of consumer debt that's been landed on top of our college kids. Why is that a big deal, and why is that happening to college kids? Well, think about that. These college kids don't have any political power. They're not interested in getting so engaged where they're going to vote against some of these federal policies, and the federal government is dropping that debt onto kids that can least afford to pay it. And we think about why that's a big factor in our economy, and it's because when they get out of college, they've got so much debt, they can't go buy a new vehicle. They're not going to buy a house. They're years away from beginning their family. They're years away from having their family and their kids in our schools. And we're going to have a gap in that pipeline for a number of years. The birth rates from 18 to 27 years old is down about 9%. It's up from 31 to 36. So people are having their families longer, and it's having a massive impact on our economy. And these are all direct results of federal policy. So who's going to go in there and take care of that problem? Who can recognize the problem? Who can focus on that problem? And who has a track record of fixing the kind of things that we've been able to do in Michigan? And I will tell you in front of you, when I talked to you in 2010 as I was campaigning to be your state senator, I talked to you about how proud I am to be serving, what an honor it is to be elected, and how much I really appreciate the relationship that I've built with the voters over my career in politics. I got into politics after running a trucking company for almost 20 years. I was asked to run for county commissioner because of some local business issues that were happening in St. Clair County. They needed leadership on a board. I took that challenge on short notice, and I was able to win. From there, we did the same thing at the state. We ran for state representative, and I enjoyed it. I loved that job. And then I was fortunate enough to be your state senator for 4 years. Lost you in 2014. Didn't forget about you, but lost you because of a redistricting issue. And I picked up Huron County and Sanilac County. And that has been so helpful for me as I looked at weighing my opportunities to run for Congress. Because if you look at the district that I've represented, it's about 45% of the entire congressional district in terms of registered voters and voters in the primary. That alone doesn't give you a whole lot of advantage. It is a factor, but it is not the factor. what will be the factor, what will determine who wins this race on August 2nd is the one who has the relationship with the voters, who can clearly demonstrate a path and a vision, and has a track record that can demonstrate that you've taken on the most difficult issues facing the state. We don't, in the Michigan Senate, we don't just get to pick one issue to work on. We've got to work on them all. We were talking earlier about energy. We're going to deal with energy tomorrow. We're going to deal with Detroit Public Schools tomorrow. We're going to deal with medical marijuana tomorrow. And the reason that I do these events is to be able to hear from you. And what do these issues mean to you and to your community? And I've worked really hard to be able to keep those lines of communication open. I won't point out any names in here, but I can tell you a lot of long rides since I commuted every day from Lansing to St. Clair. I can tell you that there were a lot of Tea Party people that I would talk to either on my way in or on my way home. And my cell phone number is everywhere. And so I'm here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity. Unfortunately, we got snowed out a couple months ago, and it was looking tonight like we were going to be voting all night, but we moved our schedule around, so I was fortunate because I didn't want to miss another one of these things because it's not going to do you any good to talk to me in August or September when this has already been concluded. So I appreciate getting me back on the schedule, Tim. I do appreciate that. And I would just tell you that the next 60 days, you're going to see a lot of information's going to be coming at you. But the one thing that I can tell you that I know with certainty after building relationships with the voters in the Thumb and Macomb County is that the voters are pretty sophisticated. The voters pay close attention, and the voters are doing their homework. And so I'm confident that the right decision will be made. I'm asking you for your support tonight. And in exchange for that support, I'm giving you a commitment. And that commitment will go as far and as long as I have the support of the voters. That's what gets you to Washington, but more importantly, that's what keeps you viable to take on the most difficult issues that are facing this country. And if I can't come back from Washington, if I'm blessed enough to be elected your congressman, and come back to a room like this and still have your support, the only way that I get your support is staying true to the values. It's staying committed to the principles that I'm asking you to consider in your decision. Because I don't need the big corporate PAC money. You don't need a lot of money to win these races today. What you need is a clear vision, able to demonstrate a track record, put that consistency out there, and I assure you the voters will get it right. I thank you for your time. Greg, you're going to moderate some questions?
Right. If you want a question, please raise your hand. I'll hand you the microphone so we can get it on the tape and we put it on our website. So does anybody have a question?
Hi, Phil. It's glad to have you here again. Just recently, in fact, last night I was listening to the news, and when the whole health care thing went through, one of the big things was, that no, and I don't mean to sound, I know the whole undocumented folks are kind of another issue, but regarding health care, I understand now that California, and of course California, is looking at ways to sidestep that issue and just to give out the health care to folks that are breaking the rules and showing up at our borders. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you sense, or what do you think are the possibilities for dealing with that if you were to make it to Washington? And what are your thoughts on that? Because for a lot of us, there's a lot of different decisions there, but again, our federal government, the Tea Parties and conservative groups, first off, were targeted by the IRS. I mean, there's just been one thing after another, but it was the constant lies. I mean, it's just, it's very distressing to even listen to the news anymore. But your thoughts on the whole opening up the health care to the undocumented folks?
That's a great question. When I remember Congresswoman Candace Miller held a forum in Port Huron, we had a town hall forum at the city council chambers, and she had a copy of the bill, 1,200 pages, And I remember somebody saying, answered a question from the audience saying, how did they get that 1,200 bill package written so quick? And I chuckled to myself. I didn't chuckle outside of, publicly. They have literally been working on this issue for the last 75 years. Why do the Democrats want that issue? Is because it does just what Bill says it does. It opens up the floodgates, and the end game is a permanent majority for Democrats. And you just have to have that as a premise of what you're talking about, because that's the end game. That is what the social engineering design has been. And the way that you do it is you use health care as that opportunity, because everybody has a health issue. It's the one thing that we all have to deal with if we live long enough. But it happens the first minute you're born until the minute that you die. So you become controlled by the state. And when I say state, I mean the federal government. So what do? Obviously, we all know that it were only Democrats that voted for it. I've signed the pledge and committed to repealing Obamacare. I've opposed any Obamacare implementation in the state of Michigan. When it came time to, one of the hallmarks to get Obamacare rooted in this country was blackmailing and ransom to the states for Medicaid expansion. And I remember that battle in Lansing about, hey, we need to accept Medicaid expansion in this state because we're going to get $3 billion worth of money for the first 3 years. And you want to see a mad dash for cash. The hospitals, the doctors, the insurance companies, they were all in on it. We couldn't muster enough to stop it in the Senate. If you'll remember, the governor was putting up billboards urging the Senate to take a vote on this issue. We didn't want to take the vote on the thing. We rejected it on its face. Why? Because once that camel's nose gets under the tent, you are in there. So here's what's happened since 2012 when the state of Michigan implemented Medicaid expansion. It was always suggested that there would be about 350,000 people that were going to sign up for Medicaid benefits in the next 3 to 4 years. Guys, we had 600,000 enrollees in the first year. That's a constituency that you cannot control. And when we find out how they got the 600,000, and if you signed up for Medicaid and you were in that condition where you needed that that help and support, that's one thing. But Medicaid expansion was never based on needs. It was based on income. It had nothing to do with a healthy 21-year-old versus a very sick 84-year-old individual. It was all about mass. And so when you get 600,000 people, it's very difficult to say, well, 300,000 you have to go because you're healthy. 300,000 you can stay because you do meet the requirements for Medicaid. Since then, we've continued to raise the HICA tax. Without getting into detail, that's how the state of Michigan pulls down our federal match money. But guys, that federal match money is going away. We are going to be weaned off that first free shot of cash, that free injection, that boxcar of cash that came to Michigan to our hospitals, and it's slowly going to go away. And it's going to affect the education budget, the natural resources, the public safety, our corrections budget, and pretty soon you're going to be consuming so much of your state budget paying for a Medicaid expansion program that was really the hallmark for President Obama to get a foothold on your life, on your control. And so when I talk about a room like this, building support for the difficult decisions that I'm going to go and face, I'm not going in there just to be comfortable. I don't care about being called the congressman. It's not something that I'm high on. It's just, I don't need you when I come back to say, hey, thanks for standing up. Thanks for taking a run at that. I can only imagine the insurance companies and the powerful lobby groups that are trying to, carve you in pieces for doing that. But if I have your support, that kind of pressure means nothing. And so it's all about control. And on a border state like California, you start creating permanent majorities. And it's happening in Michigan, too. I don't know how many of you have found and listened to the city of Detroit wanting to develop their own identification card. Anybody hear about that? Why do you suppose the city of Detroit wants their own city identification card? Where do you think that leads? So right now in Michigan, the minute you're born, you qualify for a Michigan identification. It's secure, it's safe. And if you don't have the money, the $10 or $15 for that card, they'll give you one. But these cities and municipalities, oh, by the way, Detroit's a sanctuary city, have co-sponsored legislation to remove all of their state aid, their revenue sharing, until they drop that designation as a sanctuary city. These immigration issues are real. They're in our backyard. They're very close. But what ends up happening is they get a pathway, and that pathway sometimes leads to voting when it isn't necessary. It leads to when it's not doable, when they actually don't qualify to vote. It also leads to opening up bank accounts. It leads to moving money out of the country. It leads to a whole lot of things that are actually having a big impact on our community. And so if you don't stop that whole program, you're going to continue to have the problems that you're talking about. You get rid of Obamacare, you replace it with something that is actually reasonable. In Michigan, we're discussing right now of patient-centered health care, where you can actually go and build a relationship with your doctor outside of the insurance system, where you are controlling the health care, the relationship, and the cost that you pay to your doctor. Those alternatives need to be encouraged. I'm working with Senator Colbeck right now to get a pilot program in Michigan to start us on a pathway away from Obamacare.
Any other questions? Oh.
Senator Pavlov, can you tell us why you supported moving the state senators' offices to the luxurious new office buildings for $134 million instead of renovating the existing one for $24 million that would have been adequate for your use?
I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Okay. That might be your opinion, but that isn't what happened. The legislature took action on one piece, and that was to sell a state asset. If you go back and look at how that happened, you'll find, and probably a better question for the Senate Majority Leader at the time, Randy Richardville. He made that decision, signed that paperwork on his own without legislative approval. I voted to be able to sell a building. So there was no vote to move into a building. There was no vote to renovate anything. There was simply a vote to sell a state asset.
Any other questions?
Common Core seems to be a big issue right now, Senator. And I believe when the state Senate voted for Common Core funding, that it passed unanimously by a voice vote.
Yep.
That seems to be a cover to keep people from getting politically hammered later on. Why wasn't there a roll call vote put on that funding, and it could have been killed before it even started?
Yeah, let me tell you where I was on that issue. I chaired the Senate Education at the time. I was in leadership, and that was a leadership decision for the Senate Majority Leader to voice vote that because there weren't enough votes to push that through. So the Senate actually did not vote for that bill. They voted for it in the House with the record roll call vote. And what Majority Leader Richardville did at the time is he knew that there weren't enough votes for it. He knew that I had posseed and rallied enough no votes where that wouldn't have passed. And he did a procedural move where he gavelled it on. That's just an inside politics thing. And so I will tell you that for about 3 months before that actual gavelled on piece of legislation happened, I was in charge of eliminating the Common Core and at the same time replacing it with the standards that made sense in Michigan. So I can go through every piece of that process with you, happy to do that with you. But in the end, I lost that battle. I lost it in that piece of time. So Senator Colbeck and I started working on an alternative to get rid of Common Core. So I will tell you this about Common Core. Common Core isn't Common Core anymore because state by state by state is peeling out of it. Okay? When I lost the actual voice vote to the Majority Leader, the most powerful guy in the Senate, I pivoted right next to the state assessment. So if you don't have a state assessment that measures to the Common Core, then you begin unraveling the Common Core. So we were successful not only in the Senate, but in the House at the time, to get rid of the MEEP test. Why did we want to get rid of the MEEP test? Because that's what was the implementer for Common Core. And so it may sound like a patchwork of back and forth to try to get to the Common Core issue. So we got rid of the assessment test. Fast forward to where we are today in Michigan, and this was another Obama stimulus type behavioral scheme. And if you remember, the legislature did not vote to implement Common Core. The legislature had nothing to do with establishing Common Core. It was voted on by the State Board of Education. How many of you can name 2 people on the State Board of Education right now? Jan, Ken. Jim, Ken. So what ended up happening is when Obama came up with this whole idea of stimulus money, they put $7 billion into education, and they said, if you implement Common Core standards, you can qualify for this money. If you do A, B, C, and D, we'll tempt you with some money. Well, the State Board of Education came up with this great idea and said, we're going to implement Common Core. Not a legislative issue. It had to be done at the policy level at the State Board. So they implement it. Guess what never came? The money. Okay? And so that policy is gone. There's been a new education bill that was rewritten and approved just this year that wipes out all of those things. States aren't required to have to do it anymore. So I worked with Senator Colbeck to introduce a bill. It passed out of our committee, and I had a half-hour conversation with the majority leader today. It's on the Senate floor. We have 20 votes to repeal it and replace it with Michigan standards and close the book on what was a disastrous public policy which confused parents, confused kids, cost an enormous amount of money in implementation. But there are people that still want to hang on to that old system. Business leaders from Michigan. Some of these big business groups that want to hang on to these standards. Because they haven't been able to separate the fact that there's no place in the Constitution where it talks about education. And we were talking earlier about states' rights. I will assure you that we are very qualified to develop our own state standards for Michigan. We don't need to adopt federal standards. So I put Common Core in the same conversation as the bathroom policies that the president has lined in. And why do I put those two together? Number one, they're both infringements on state rights, but number two, they are going toward the core bedrock of how our state and our country and our education system has been established. I talk to parents, teachers, and educators every day in my job. The most important factor in education is parental involvement. Try to sit with your student in 6th grade and walk through their math lesson. What's more appalling is some of the social studies and the curriculums that have been adopted nationally to deal with those issues. We're close. I would say get a hold of your state representative. They haven't even taken up the bill over there. They have a chair of that committee that doesn't seem to be interested in it. They have a leader in Gary Glenn. Many of you would know Gary Glenn is a very conservative leader in Michigan. He's driving the issue in the Senate. I can't even get the chairwoman of the Education Committee to even call me back to hold a hearing. Focus on the House, build some momentum there, and we could essentially have the Common Core replaced with what is a national standard. We could do that in 8 months. And the good thing is, it isn't going to cost our school districts any money to pivot back to the standards that we've had. If you want to fight that, I can use you.
Okay, one more question. Anybody have one?
I have to say, Phil, I really hate to see our tax dollars spent. And the one thing I don't understand is you voted for the $500 million, what do they call it, the Michigan film credits that went in play. And I'm wondering, what do you know of that you voted for? And then would you actually made money on that, or did we actually gain back in taxes for that? Then also we had $1.5 billion spent on the 21st Century Jobs Program. And did that have any benefits to the state also in those programs during the Granholm administration?
Yeah, I think you could go back and look at the 21st century as an opportunity to stimulate some growth. I think if you're talking, you've done a lot of homework. I really appreciate you doing your homework. I'm impressed. Are you referring to the vote last year on the film credit? Okay. So we had a bill to eliminate the film credit in Michigan. We've been slowly chopping it down. Well, we had a bill from my replacement in the Michigan House, Dan Lowers. Came over from the Senate, from the House to the Senate. I was in full support until there was an amendment put on there. Remember what the amendment was? The amendment was to reopen the state film office. We had shut it down in the House-passed version. We do not need a state film office in this state. We don't have a film industry where we need a bureaucracy to manage an industry that's gone. There was an amendment put back in on the floor, which means you got to follow this stuff along pretty closely. You got to be careful about sound bites and careful unless you're going to go down to the bottom of the legislation. And what you'll see in there, Chris, is that it reestablished for 3 more years the film office. Couldn't support that. Couldn't support it. Tax credits are gone. We put it into roads, rightfully so.
Thank you.
Got it, Tim.
Any other questions for the Senator? Have to be quick.
Okay.
Right off the bat, you'd mentioned the tax code, but you also talked about spending problems at the national level. So what would be some priorities for you of where we can cut spending at the federal level?
Oh my gosh, where do we start? Let's start with entitlements. Start right there. I don't think that there's any need to continue to expand the Social Security Disability Trust Fund, particularly when we already know that it's scheduled to be bankrupt potentially in 2017, 2018 at the earliest. You know, some of the things that we did in Michigan is what I would apply to Washington. I'd start with welfare. In Michigan, when we finally adopted in 2012 lifetime benefits for welfare, we had 10,000 people that were still collecting welfare past the 4-year federal limit. But if you remember, that was Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich's issue, welfare reform. But the states had to go in and adopt it. So we fought Governor Granholm for 6 years while in the House to adopt the 4-year maximum for health care, or for welfare. She wouldn't do it. Didn't happen. We did it in 2011 when we came back. So let me tell you, we had 10,000 families that were receiving that. We sent a letter, the department did. And the letter had 3 phone numbers on it. The first letter went out informing people that your benefits are going to cease on October 1st of 2012. Here's a phone number to help you with transitional housing. You could potentially qualify for a 90-day extension while you're transition housing. The other phone number had a number asking people to call that phone number to see if they needed transitional food and benefits and aid for dependent women and children and WIC, things like that. And the third one gave the people that were on welfare for more than 4 years an opportunity at workforce training, job retraining. We got about, numbers are going to be rough here, 12 to 2,500, somewhere in there, people calling for transitional housing. Got about half of that, 700 or 800 for people that were looking for additional support for food and services for their family. Guess how many people called the phone number for job retraining? 0. Last time I looked, there were like 7. So what the media was telling you is that when Michigan adopts a lifetime benefit of only 4 years, that people were going to be dying in the streets and that there was going to be mayhem. The same thing they said to Governor Engler. It's all a myth. We got rid of that. But you know what else we did at the same time? We took 30,000 bridge cards away from college kids that didn't need them. 30,000 of them. Anybody read about college kids starving to death at U of M? I mean, you go to U of M, you see anybody? Now, hungry is one thing. Starving is a whole other thing. Just by that, those are federal pass-through programs. So we stopped that. Those food stamps come through, the food assistance. We've got the largest growing population in food assistance. But remember, we also have programs in the state that are designed to take care of the most vulnerable people. Where's the line between vulnerable? And where's the line between true need? And so if you can't start with those entitlement programs, that's where the big money is. But on the spending, anybody want to guess what the third largest line item in the budget is going to be next year? The federal budget? Interest on the debt. Before we go to bed tonight, we're going to accumulate $2.5 billion worth of new debt just today. We're going to do another 2.5. And so when I talk about reforming tax policy, the only way that you can stop that is to cut the fuel line. But you better have the resolve to be able to take the politics out of the spending. And if you can't do that, you're going to get caught up into the same rat race that is federal spending. And you could go on and look at programs that don't make sense in the federal government. You can go, I mean, there's, studying beetle reproduction in Alabama. You can talk about the amount of impact the EPA has had on job providers, on the agriculture community, and how these federal regulations are crushing our economy. You want to talk about getting an economy growing, you take the regulation out. We did it in Michigan. We can do it at the federal government. And you'll start to see that recovery take hold. Because people will have confidence again. Families will be stronger. They'll have an opportunity to earn, save, the way that they used to be able to. But right now, at 2%, anybody check their 401k lately? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that, and I talk to people, they're between -1 and +1 or +2%, and they've been that way for the last 5 years. It's because the federal spending is closing out our economy. It's taking away opportunities. You're going to get to a point very soon, if this same pattern continues, that the banks will be charging you to keep your own money in their bank. We could sit around this room and solve a lot of these problems. The answers aren't the ones that are hard to come by. The real challenge is having the resolve to go in there and do it. I've been able to demonstrate that we've had that resolve, got a track record of success in there. And today in Michigan, our welfare claims are down 70% than when I became your senator in 2010. This is doable. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. Happy to answer any other questions after the meeting for a little bit. Access to your room and to your members has been very nice, and I appreciate it, Tim.
Thank you very much, Senator.
You got it.
We appreciate it. Thank you. And as the Senator said, he'll be around to answer questions for you for a little bit after class. After class, listen. Education. Okay, as you know, at our meetings, we try very hard to give everybody an opportunity to know what's going on in Lansing and what's going on in Washington best way we can. So we're also going to hear from a representative of our Michigan senator and also our representative for the state House of Representatives, Mr. Howell. But before I do that, I wanted to just take 1 minute and introduce Brandon Miller here. Brandon is is a new appointed job, and I just want him to tell you what he does and introduce himself here before we get to the information part. So this is Brendan. Please give him a hand.
So I'll just be real brief here. So real quick, my name is Brendan Miller. I work for the Michigan Republican Party. I am pretty much the coordinator for Lapeer County when it comes to door-to-door operations and everything Republican. So I need your help. So who here is happy with the direction of the country? No? Great. I need you. We need people to help go out door-to-doors, help knock, help make sure conservatives are out there every day and make sure they go to the polls to make sure that we don't have a Hillary Clinton presidency. Does anyone want a Hillary Clinton presidency? No? That's great. And another thing I wanted to bring up too, if you say, oh, I don't know, I'm not really sure about going door-to-door, I haven't done it before, that's fine. That's why I am offering you a chance to go to a free, registration-free, with free food event. We're talking about this Saturday. We're going to do a training program for anybody who is interested in going door to door, interested in maybe just the process. You get to come in free of charge at 11 o'clock, get to go through basically how to knock on a door, how to approach people, how to talk to people at the door. And then we give you a free lunch, and you get to go on for there. No commitment, nothing to worry about. So, once again, it's at 11 o'clock at the Lapeer Center for Innovation, also known as the Old Lapeer West High School. Hopefully, I plan to see each and every one of you there because no one raised their hands. And also, if you are interested in helping the Republican Party move this state and move this country forward, please come and see me after the meetings so you can sign up. I'm not asking for a lot of commitment. Literally, 3 hours a month, that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Okay, now, from our two illustrious representatives from Michigan, first, Mr. Gary Howell, our House of Representatives. Please give him a hand.
Thank you, Tim. This is going to be brief and direct to the point. No BS. My name is Gary Howell. I'm your state representative. I'm an American, I'm a constitutional conservative, and I'm a Republican in that order. I was elected to represent you folks. I was not elected by Governor Snyder. I was not elected by the Republican Party. I was reelected and elected by you. And so here's my report as to what I've been doing. First, I have voted against the Detroit Public School bailout. I voted against it twice, as a matter of fact. And if they give me a third opportunity, I'll vote against it 3 times. First time, they wanted me to vote for $500 million to pour down the rat hole. We voted no. The Senate approved $715 million. They came back to the House. They wanted us to approve $617 million this last week, and I voted no. I was one of only 6 Republicans to vote against that. We've got to stop this constant subsidizing of inefficiency and poor government. We've got to start insisting on getting value for our tax dollars, and it's not happening with these kind of things. I might point out that in that package, they are giving Detroit $150 million for so-called startup costs and building repairs. $150 million. All right. This is on top of all the state aid they get, which if you add federal, state, and local is about $13,000 plus per student. Your students in Lapeer County are getting $8,000 or $9,000 if you add up federal, state, and local assistance. It's interesting. We just voted to give them, over my protest, $150 million. The total debt in Lapeer County of all 5 of our school districts, the bonded debt you are all paying for on your tax bills, turns out to be $155 million. We just gave away enough money, we could have covered all of Lapeer's debt, of bonded debt. Instead, you're going to pay for Detroit, and you're going to pay for your own debt. There's something fundamentally wrong here. Co-sponsored a proposed constitutional amendment that passed the other day, passed in the sense that we approved it to go to the voters. It will expand the protections of search and seizure. Right now, you need a warrant to come into your house and grab your letters and your papers and so on. This will explicitly put in the Constitution they need a warrant if they're going to try to get into your cell phone, your electronic data, or any place else. It's going to make sure the government follows the rules of our Constitution. I'm going to sound like a negative guy, but I did vote for that, so I did vote positive on one thing. I voted against a bill that passed the other day on auto parts, where they're going to mandate that you use only what they call OEF parts, the original parts from the company. I noticed it passed before I got there. It passed with a negative vote of 22. They brought it back with some amendments. Now it passed with a negative vote of 23. I was 23. But it's another example of government sticking its nose into our business. It's between you and your repair shop. It's not for us to dictate what kind of parts you have to put on your car and what those expenses are. I think you've talked about smart meters a bit, and I'm supportive of a bill that would prevent them from forcing those down our throat, which is what they're doing right now, as you know if you've already had one installed on your house. And there's lots of issues raised about privacy, about health, about so on and so forth. But I ran across an interesting number the other day that I think gives even a better explanation of what's really behind all this. They were talking about the energy bills that Carl was talking about. And they quoted one of our friends from the Michigan Environmental Council, a fellow named James Clift, and he was complaining about the costs were missing in Michigan, and he pointed out, in his opinion, the failure to use better smart meters to reduce peak demand would cost the utilities $2.17 billion. Now think about that. If they're going to get $2.17 billion through the smart meter system, where is that going to come from? Exactly. Well, that's the first time I've seen that number, but I underlined it when I ran across it. One other item I've worked on is when I got there, my first co-sponsorship was of the Open Meetings Act, Open Records Act bills. As you may know, to our embarrassment as a state, in my opinion, the legislature and the governor have been exempt from the Open Records Act. You could go here to Mayfield Township under the law and get any record that's in that township office. But you could not go to your legislator, you could not go to your governor and have that. I've co-sponsored bills to change that, to bring them under the law. They have been vetted in committee, they're reported out of committee, and I'm hoping to see action on those in the House. The last bill, because I don't want to drag this thing on, you guys have sat patiently, but I feel it's my obligation to come to you and report what I'm doing. And I want you to feel free to contact my office at any time. My number's in the phone book, my number's in Lansing. I'll give you my cell number. If there's an issue, email. I want to hear from you. And whether we agree or disagree, I will give you a straight answer as to what I believe we should do. The last one I want to mention is something called dark stores. Right now, you are getting beat up as a taxpayer. You are paying your taxes based on your tax value of your property. The big guys, the Myers, the Krogers, the Thrifty Acres, the Sam's Club, so on and so forth, they have got a sweet deal through the state tax tribunal. They have managed to hornswoggle, in my opinion, the tax tribunal. They've let them use a valuation system none of us could use. They've said, Meyer, you've built this $15 million store, but even though you just spent $15 million, we're going to let you appeal and claim it's worth $3 million because you're going to point to other stores that are vacant or deed restricted, and those are comparable. And believe it or not, the tax tribunal has granted those reductions. So we're taking it in the ear as taxpayers, and the corporations, the big ones, are getting away with a lot of money. I've co-sponsored a bill that will mandate that the tax tribunal use standard appraisal values on all properties, including these big boxes. It's come out of committee. It's on the floor of the House. I hope we're going to pass that bill yet this week. But a lot of this stuff is inside baseball to a degree, but I can assure you the reason I care about it is we are losing as taxpayers, and that's the one theme I'm focused on down there, whether it's ridiculous spending or whether it's backdoor deals that are costing us money. I'm going to be on the job, and I promise you you're going to hear more from me as time goes on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. That's the kind of stuff we need to know about, don't you think? That's why people like Phil and Mr. Howell and Mr. Malus. I'll get it, Jim. Jim is the representative for our senator, Senator Green, and he's going to tell us what Senator Green's been doing lately. Let's welcome Jim.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Representative Howell stole a little bit of my thunder tonight, so my report's going to be a little bit shorter, so we will thank Gary for that regards. First item, I think, is a follow-up on what Senator Pavlov was talking about, an example of trying to do what we can to either create jobs or retain jobs in Lapeer County. Mike, I think from the very beginning, when he became your state senator, talked about having better communications with our business and industry representatives, business owners, business managers, and particularly trying to get some more manufacturing jobs in Lapeer County. Mike has been able to make visits to a number of our local manufacturing firms. Representative Howell has been able to join us on some of those. And hopefully you read in the paper not too long ago about an expansion at KMAX. This is a case where we had a whole lot of government regulation involved, some at the state level, some at the federal level, some maybe even at the county level. And Senator Green was able to meet with the company representatives, and occasionally a friendly phone call from a state elected official to somebody maybe at the DEQ or DNR can get a little bit more of a pro-business attitude. So Mike did not, have to wave his magic wand, but like I say, sometimes just being able to make a phone call can come in handy. Representative Howell talked about this bill that takes away the car owner's choice of less expensive parts. Keep in mind, I believe it's House Bill 4344. This is a case where some people in Lansing think that if your car is more than 5 years old, that you need to buy the more expensive OEM, original equipment manufacturer. Much like Representative Howell, that was approved in the Senate on a vote of 33-4. Mike was one of the 4 no votes, and I'm sure some of the leadership was not happy with that, but he felt that it was just going to be more of a burden and actually putting more restrictions on those of us who drive older cars, perhaps with 222,000 miles or something close to that. I was not totally aware of this, but the state of Michigan apparently has not been doing all that well in our recycling program. Governor made some kind of a pledge back in 2014 to try to get Michiganders to be a little bit more active in recycling. Mike introduced legislation, Senate Bill 507, which recently became PA 55. This is trying to improve communications, have a few more mandates with companies that deal with recycling, and I think the main thrust of it is if we can collect better recycling data, hopefully this will give us a better idea, what programs work and which ones probably are not the greatest. So we will see how the PA 55 shapes up. Again, quickly, Representative Howell talked about this term dark store assessing, and I think he made reference to House Bill 5578. This was introduced by a state representative who happens to be a Republican. It would force future tax assessments on big box stores to be based on all 3 accepted assessment measures. I am not an expert in assessing. I think Gary probably knows that a whole lot better, but I think Mike would probably agree that Michigan Association of Counties was able to kind of state their case pretty well, and I believe it was actually the Court of Appeals that ruled in favor of some of the taxing entities such as the county. So we can thank, I believe, the city of Escanaba for getting that topic off the ground. Last one, this one comes from Mike, Right to Life of Michigan. Some of you may have heard a term called CAPA, C-A-P-A. This is your vocabulary word for the day. It's called Coercive Abortion Prevention Act. Mike is one of our senators who has that 100% pro-life voting record. This is actually considered common sense legislation to protect a woman from being coerced into an abortion against her will. Evidence, testimonies, and studies show coercion happens frequently to women facing crisis pregnancies. I think they've even determined that some of our human trafficking is now kind of going hand in hand with this type of coercive abortion. It was approved in the Senate on a vote of 26-11. We continue to get some very good feedback from Right to Life, and when we compare our state program to other states, I think we continue to do very well. So hopefully our senators like Mike Green will continue that for a long time to come. And that completes my semi-abbreviated report.
Thank you, Mr. McCluskey. It's always nice and pleasant to have somebody, all our representatives up here. We have a question, Jan? Okay.
And I would like to invite you all to come to our summer picnic meeting next Thursday night, June 16th, at the home of Roger and Ann Harris's. It's at 2617 Marathon Road in Oregon Township. In all this time of seriousness with everything that's going on, we want to have a fun evening. We've invited all of our candidates, county candidates, and all of our candidates to come. All we ask is you bring a cold dish to pass, your own beverage. We are supplying hot dogs from B-Dub's Hot Dog Cart, and we're going to have a live auction, which should be fun and entertaining. So on that note, we invite all of you to come next Thursday night and join us. Thank you.
You have a contact number? If it's
all the information's on our website, www.lapeergop.com. And some of you will be getting invitations in the mail. So I want to give a shout out to Christina Russell because she has been very instrumental in doing this. We did a picnic last year in August, but we decided to move it up before the primary, so we're doing it in June. And huge thank you to Roger and Ann Harris for opening up their home to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that just about ends our meeting here. I'd like to have Carol come back up, Brown, and do a closing statement for us. Keep in mind that next month's meeting will be on July 12th. Just a quick reminder. This meeting is going to be a forum again. And it'll be a forum for all the local candidates, not all the county candidates running for office. We have, I don't know exact numbers right now, but they'll all be getting an invitation from the Tea Party here. Five? Where'd they go? Okay. 4 or 5 prosecutors. We have 3 commissioners, county commissioners. We have drain commissioners, 3 of them. We have a couple road commissioners. And the way we're going to handle that is pretty much the way we handled all our forums, where the audience writes down questions and they submit them, and then the monitor will be handing out those questions, and everybody will get to answer the same question. Now, I don't know, you're thinking, how are we going to do that when we got 3 or 4 different groups? Well, we'll have them in groups. So the only exception here, or difference here, is we're going to have, when you write down your question, please indicate on there who you want the question to go to. If you want it to go to the prosecutors, candidates, the commissioners' candidates, or whatever. And then they will answer that question, those candidates. That way, you will all get a chance to hear their platforms, how they plan to help us as residents of Lapeer, and what their plans are, and what your questions are that you may have for them. Those are important positions here. They're your local representatives that we are about to put in office. And it's important that they all get a chance to tell you what they're thinking of, and you get a chance to ask them any questions. That'll be July 12th, and that'll be right back here at 7 o'clock. Okay? Okay. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Tim. Would you please stand with me for our closing prayer? Father, thank you for this peaceful assembly tonight. Please give your angels charge over us to get to our destination safely. Help us make wise decisions on our upcoming elections this year. In Jesus' name, amen. You're dismissed.
Class is over. Thanks, folks.